The stars hung silent and cold beyond the observation deck. Admiral Saren stood with his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back, his crystalline eyes reflecting the distant flares of battle that peppered the darkness. 12 warships, all that remained of the once proud Lis Prime Defense Fleet, engaged in yet another holding action against the bioships of the Hive. Each engagement cost them dearly. Each victory grew more Pyrrhic than the last. Behind him, the door to the command deck whispered open. He did not need to turn to know it was Captain Talon, his logistics officer and oldest friend. The refugee count has increased by another 7,000, Talon reported, his voice carrying the weariness they all felt after months of constant retreat. Orbital Station 3 is at 182% capacity. The environmental systems cannot sustain this much longer. Saren's translucent skin flushed a deeper blue with frustration. And the Hive? Their adaptation curve is accelerating. The new bioarmor renders our energy weapons 63% less effective than last week. At this rate, Talon trailed off, the implications clear. Saren finally turned, facing not just Talon, but the holographic display of Lis Prime that hovered between them. Once a jewel of the Galactic Defense Coalition, a world of crystalline spires and harmonious technology. Now half the continent glowed with the sickly green of Hive infestation. They evolve faster than we can develop countermeasures, Saren said softly. Coalition Command promised reinforcements 3 cycles ago. Perhaps they are not coming, Talon ventured. Perhaps they cannot spare the ships. The Admiral's gaze hardened. Then we make them understand that without Lis Prime, there is no coalition. If we fall, the Hive gains access to the central navigation charts. They will spread without containment. Saren strode to the communications array. Decision made. His slender fingers moved with precision across the control surface. This is Admiral Saren of the Lis Prime Defense Fleet to Coalition High Command. Our situation is beyond critical. Civilian casualties mounting daily. Hive adaptation outpacing defensive capabilities. Reinforcements needed, or we fall. I repeat, reinforcements needed, or we fall. He ended the transmission and looked up at the stars once more. Now we wait. The response came faster than expected. Barely 6 hours later, Saren was reviewing evacuation protocols when his personal communicator chimed with priority coalition encoding. Admiral Saren, this is High Command. Your situation is acknowledged. All available coalition battle groups are currently engaged. No conventional reinforcements can be dispatched. Saren felt his heart sink, the delicate membranes of his inner ears deflating with the crushing weight of abandonment. But the message continued. However, we have received volunteer contingents from non-member worlds. These species are classified as Deathworlders, evolved on extreme condition planets. They claim to have experience against adaptive hostiles. Be advised, these allies are untested in coalition protocols and considered dangerous by conventional standards. They arrive within 48 hours. High Command out. Talon, who had been listening beside him, looked perplexed. Deathworlders. They're sending primitives to fight the Hive. Saren's inner membranes fluttered with a strange mix of desperation and curiosity. At this point, old friend, I would accept help from cosmic demons if they could stop the Hive. The alert came during the 3rd shift. 3 vessels of unknown configuration dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the Lis system. Not the sleek, unified design of coalition ships, nor the organic nightmare of Hive biovessels. These were different, one blocky and angular, with what appeared to be crude kinetic weapon mounts. Another, a collection of interconnected spheres, pulsing with gravitational distortion fields. And the third, a living ship that seemed more plant than machine, its hull overgrown with metallic vines and thorns. Transmit recognition codes and escort them to Docking Bay 7, Saren ordered, straightening his uniform as he prepared to meet these mysterious allies. And alert Lieutenant Mira to join us. Her xenobiological expertise may prove useful. The docking bay was a flurry of activity, as engineers and security personnel prepared for the unknown visitors. Lieutenant Mira arrived moments before the ships docked, her datapad clutched tightly in her delicate hands. "Admiral," she greeted with a stiff bow, "I've reviewed what little the Coalition database contains on Deathworlder species. It's concerning." "Enlighten me," Saren replied, as the docking clamps engaged the first ship. "These species evolved on planets we would classify as uninhabitable," Mira explained, her professional tone belied by the nervous flicker of her eyes. "Extreme gravity, temperature variations that would shatter our bodies, atmospheric toxicity, radiation levels that would destroy our cellular structure." "And they survived?" "More than survived. Admiral, they thrived." Mira's voice dropped lower. "The database warns that such conditions produce species with aggressive tendencies, primitive but effective violence, physical resilience that borders on the impossible." The docking bay doors began to cycle open. Saren straightened his posture, attempting to project confidence he did not feel. "Then let us hope those tendencies are directed at the hive, rather than us." The first to emerge were the humans. Bipedal, clothed in matte black armor that seemed remarkably thin compared to Coalition battlesuits. They moved with a predatory grace that belied their solid forms. Their leader stepped forward, taller than the rest, with dark skin and eyes that reflected the harsh light of the docking bay with unsettling intensity. "Major Kane, Earth Expeditionary Force," the human announced in a deep voice that seemed to vibrate through Saren's sensitive auditory membranes. "We bring 30 soldiers, 16 combat engineers, and enough kinetic munitions to level a small moon." Before Saren could respond, the second ship's occupants emerged. The Varen were shorter, with dense musculature evident even through their pressure suits. Their skin had a bluish tinge, and their eyes were wide-set in broad faces, an adaptation to see through the dense atmospheres of their gas-giant moons. Their movements were deliberate, controlled, as if constantly fighting against a gravity that wasn't present. "Commander Willix of the Varen Deep Pressure Combat Division," their leader announced, voice modulated through a translation device. 22 divers trained in crushing environments, plus equipment to weaponize pressure differentials. The third ship disgorged its passengers last, the Thornfolk. They defied easy description, their bodies a seamless blend of plant-like and humanoid features. Metallic filaments grew alongside what might be hair, and their skin had the texture of bark, with an iridescent sheen. They moved with liquid grace, eyes the color of molten copper, scanning the docking bay with obvious curiosity. "I am Envoy Vrayan," their leader said, voice melodic yet somehow discordant. "We bring 16 warriors and 12 bioengineers. The toxic compounds of our world will become the bane of your enemies." Silence fell across the docking bay as Coalition personnel stared at the newcomers with undisguised apprehension. Saren stepped forward, forcing himself to meet each Deathworlder leader's gaze. "On behalf of the Galactic Defense Coalition and the people of Lys Prime, I welcome you," he said formally. "I am Admiral Saren. This is my logistics officer, Captain Talon, and Lieutenant Mira, our chief xenobiologist." "Formalities can wait," Major Kane interrupted, scanning the bay with a practiced eye. "Your distress signal mentioned adaptive insectoids. We need to see their biology, your weapon systems, and defensive positions immediately." Saren blinked, taken aback by the directness. Coalition protocol dictated formal welcome ceremonies, cultural exchange briefings, and gradual integration of allied forces. But there was something in the human stance, a coiled readiness, that suggested such luxuries were meaningless to these people. "Of course," he replied, surprising even himself. "Lieutenant Mira can brief you on hive biology. Captain Talon will coordinate your equipment transfers." "And you, Admiral?" Commander Willix asked. the Varan's eyes never ceasing their vigilant scanning of the environment. "I will show you what we're up against," Saren said grimly. "The battle that even now continues above Lys Prime." The command deck fell silent as the Deathworlders entered. Coalition officers stared with undisguised curiosity, and in some cases, revulsion, at their strange new allies. The central holographic display showed the ongoing skirmish between 3 Coalition vessels and a Hive scout ship near the outer moon. "Your energy weapons barely penetrate their armor," Major Kane observed immediately, stepping closer to the display and gesturing with a gloved hand. "You're focusing fire on the wrong locations. Our targeting systems are calibrated to maximum efficiency," objected a Coalition weapons officer. "Those are the vulnerable points identified through hundreds of engagements." "They were vulnerable points," Envoy Vrain corrected. Metallic filaments in their hair-like growths, shimmering with subtle movement. "Your enemy adapts. Each attack teaches them where to reinforce." "Precisely," Lieutenant Mira interjected, surprised to find herself agreeing. "The Hive operates on accelerated evolutionary principles. Their queens absorb combat data and implement biological changes in real time." Commander Elix made a sound like stones grinding together, apparently a Varan expression of disgust. "You attack the same way each time. Predictable, fatal." Saren watched the Deathworlders analyze the battle with discomfiting speed. Where his officers saw a tactical engagement, progressing according to doctrine, these aliens saw fatal flaws. It was both humbling and irritating. "What would you suggest?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. Kane pointed to the underbelly of the Hive vessel. "Here, between the sensory clusters, not with energy weapons, they've adapted, kinetic penetrators, mass drivers, physical trauma they can't quickly evolve against." "We abandoned kinetic weapons generations ago," Captain Talon said, aghast. "They're inefficient and environmentally destructive." "So is extinction," Kane replied flatly. Vrain moved with fluid grace to another section of the hologram. "Their communication nodes are external, here and here. Biotoxins targeted at these structures would isolate drones from the Queen's control." "And here," added Elix, indicating what appeared to be innocuous vents along the bioship's flanks. "Pressure points, vulnerable to explosive compression. Their internal systems would rupture." Saren exchanged glances with his officers. The Deathworlders spoke with absolute confidence, yet their suggestions ran counter to centuries of Coalition military doctrine. To follow their advice would mean admitting that the Coalition's advanced technology, the very foundation of their civilizational identity, was inadequate. Before he could respond, alarms blared across the command deck. "Hive vessels breaking through Defensive Line 7, called out the sensor officer. 3 biocruisers on direct approach to Orbital Station 3. "The refugees," Talon whispered, horror evident in his voice. Saren turned to the Deathworlders. Decision made. "Show me what you can do." What followed was nothing short of a revolution in Coalition tactical operations. The Deathworlders requisitioned manufacturing capacity to modify Coalition weapon systems, crude by Coalition standards, but implemented with remarkable speed. Human engineers converted energy cannons to fire hyper-accelerated metal slugs. Varan divers repurposed atmospheric regulators into pressure differential bombs. Thorn bioengineers synthesized corrosive compounds that could eat through the Hive's organic armor. Over the next 72 hours, the Deathworlders integrated themselves into Coalition operations with a ruthless efficiency that both impressed and disturbed Saren's officers. They conducted training sessions that more resembled brutal survival courses than the Coalition's methodical drills. Many Coalition soldiers failed these exercises. Some suffered injuries that required medical attention. But those who adapted began to move differently, to think differently, to fight with a ferocity they had never before possessed. Lieutenant Mira found herself increasingly fascinated by the Deathworlders. As xenobiologist, she had been tasked with monitoring their physiology and behavior, but her scientific detachment was gradually eroding. She observed human soldiers continuing to fight despite wounds that would incapacitate coalition troops. She documented Varan divers withstanding pressure differentials that should have crushed their organs. She analyzed thornfolk absorbing and neutralizing toxins that would dissolve coalition species from the inside out. "Your bodies defy conventional biological principles," she told Major Kane as she scanned his cardiac activity after a particularly grueling training session. His heart rate had barely elevated, despite exertions that would have exhausted most coalition officers. "Nothing defies principles, Lieutenant," Kane replied, watching her with those unsettlingly direct eyes. "You just haven't discovered the right ones yet. Earth, our homeworld, tried to kill us every day for millions of years. Extreme heat, extreme cold, predators, disease, radiation, each other. Those who couldn't adapt died. A harsh evolutionary pathway, but effective," Kane said with a smile that showed too many teeth to be comfortable. "Now, the hive is trying to kill you every day. The question is, will you adapt or die?" The first real test of the Deathworlders' methods came 5 days after their arrival. A hive raiding party had established a forward base in the ruins of Crystal City, one of Lys Prime's fallen metropolises. Coalition doctrine would have called for orbital bombardment, sacrificing the city to eliminate the hive presence. Instead, the Deathworlders proposed a ground assault. "Insanity," Captain Talon declared when the plan was presented. "Our troops haven't conducted ground operations against the hive in over 30 cycles. The casualties would be unacceptable. Your orbital bombardment would destroy valuable intelligence." Commander Wilex countered, "The hive chose this location for a reason. We need to know why. And we need to test our weapons against them directly," added Kane. "See how they adapt so we can counter-adapt faster." Saren studied the tactical display, weighing options that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "Who would lead this assault?" "We would," Envoy Vrain said simply. "One team from each Deathworld contingent, plus volunteers from your forces." To everyone's surprise, Lieutenant Mira stepped forward. "I volunteer. As xenobiologist, I should document hive adaptations firsthand." Saren wanted to refuse. Sending his xenobiologist into combat violated every protocol, but something in Mira's expression stopped him. The same fierce curiosity he had begun to feel himself. "Very well," he agreed. "But this is a reconnaissance mission only. Engage only when necessary, gather intelligence, and return." Kane's predatory smile returned. "Of course, Admiral." The mission was anything but reconnaissance. Saren watched from the command deck as helmet feeds showed the 3 Deathworlder teams infiltrating Crystal City from different vectors. Mira accompanied Kane's human squad, her scientific instruments repurposed to detect hive pheromone trails. The hive detected them almost immediately. Warrior drones swarmed from hidden hives, their chitinous armor gleaming in the half-light of the ruined city. But instead of retreating, the Deathworlders attacked. Humans fired their modified kinetic weapons. Guns, they called them. The hyper-accelerated metal slugs punching through bioarmor that had evolved to resist energy weapons. Varan divers deployed pressure bombs that imploded drone clusters with devastating effect. Thornfolk released spores that corroded the living architecture the hive had grown throughout the city. Saren watched in astonishment as the Deathworlders fought with coordinated savagery. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. They communicated with hand signals and short, clipped phrases. They adapted their tactics moment by moment, responding to hive counterattacks with brutal efficiency. And they protected each other. A human soldier shielded Mira with his own body when acid spewed from a wounded drone. A Varan diver pulled a fallen Thorn warrior to safety while under heavy fire. They fought not as separate species, but as a unified force bound by the shared experience of worlds that had forged them through adversity. When they returned, they brought not just intelligence about hive movements, but captured specimens and technology. Mira worked alongside Thorne bioengineers to analyze the samples. Her initial scientific detachment giving way to genuine collaboration. "They're building something," she reported to Saren and the Deathworlder leaders in a hastily convened strategy session. "The structures in Crystal City aren't just hives. They're components of a larger system." "Communication array," suggested Helix, studying the holographic reconstructions. "Worse," Kane said grimly. "Those look like psychic amplifiers. Similar technology was used by the Swarm Consciousness in the Proxima conflict. If the Hive has developed psychic warfare capabilities." "The Queen," Vrain finished. "They're preparing for the Queen's arrival." A chill ran through Saren. Coalition intelligence had theorized the existence of Hive Queens, the central intelligences that directed drone activity and evolution. But they had never encountered one directly. "How long?" he asked. Mira manipulated the holographic model, calculations flowing around her fingers. "Based on construction rates and energy signatures, less than 2 weeks. Then we have less than 2 weeks to prepare our defense," Saren declared. "Captain Talon, begin evacuation of the orbital stations. Transfer all non-essential personnel to the remaining Coalition vessels." "You expect defeat?" asked Kane, studying the Admiral with those intense eyes. "I expect to face a threat unlike any we've encountered," Saren replied evenly. "And I will not risk civilian lives unnecessarily." "A wise precaution," Vrain agreed, metallic filaments shifting in patterns that Saren had come to recognize as thoughtful consideration. "But perhaps not just defense. Perhaps a trap." Over the following days, the flagship became a hive of activity that ironically mirrored their enemies' industriousness. Coalition engineers worked alongside Deathworlder specialists to modify the fleet's capabilities. Traditional doctrine was abandoned in favor of hybrid tactics that combined Coalition technology with Deathworlder methodology. The cultural barriers began to erode as well. Coalition officers who had initially viewed the Deathworlders with suspicion now sought their expertise. Informal gatherings in the ship's mess hall became impromptu strategy sessions, where ideas flowed freely across species boundaries. Even Captain Talon, the most traditional of Saren's officers, found himself drawn into debates with Commander Helix about pressure physics and structural vulnerabilities. "Their perspectives are unorthodox," he admitted to Saren one evening. "But effective. Perhaps we have become too comfortable in our technological superiority." Lieutenant Mira underwent perhaps the most profound transformation. Her scientific observations of the Deathworlders had evolved into genuine rapport. She spent hours with the Thorne bioengineers, learning their organic technology. She trained with human combat medics, studying their emergency procedures. She even attempted Varan pressure resistance exercises, though her physiology could only tolerate the mildest levels. "They're not what I expected," she told Saren as they reviewed her latest findings on hive biology. "The database classifications: aggressive, primitive, dangerous. They're not wrong, but they're incomplete. There's an adaptability to them, a creativity born from constant struggle." "You admire them," Saren observed. Mira considered this. "I do. Their worlds tried to kill them, yet they survived, not by conquering nature but by becoming its most successful products. They understand something fundamental that we've forgotten in our technological comfort." "And what is that?" "That life persists not despite struggle, but because of it." She manipulated the holographic display, showing comparisons between hive adaptation rates and Deathworlder response strategies. The hive evolves quickly, but reactively. The Deathworlders anticipate and counter-evolve. It's fascinating. Saren studied the data, seeing patterns he would have missed weeks ago. "Can we win?" Mira's expression grew serious. "Not with conventional methods, but with what we're learning from them. There's a chance." The Queen arrived sooner than predicted. 8 days after the Crystal City mission, Sensors detected a massive hyperspace distortion at the edge of the system. The object that emerged dwarfed any hive vessel they had encountered before, a writhing, organic mountain of chitin and bioluminescent tissue nearly the size of a small moon. "All vessels to battle stations," Saren ordered, watching as the monstrosity moved with unexpected grace toward Lys Prime. "Civilian evacuation status?" "Orbital Station 1 completely evacuated," Talon reported. "Stations 2 and 3 at 47% and 63% respectively." "Not enough time," Kane muttered, studying the tactical display. "That thing will be in weapons range of the stations within 6 hours. Then we implement the trap now," Saren decided. "Whether we're ready or not." The plan they had developed was audacious to the point of madness by coalition standards. Instead of forming a defensive perimeter around the orbital stations, the textbook response, the modified coalition vessels would execute targeted strikes against specific biological systems of the Queen's vessel, following the vulnerabilities identified by the Deathworlders. Meanwhile, 3 assault teams, led by Kane, Yilix, and Vrain, would launch a boarding action directly against the Queen's vessel. Their objective: to reach the central chamber where the Queen herself would be located and neutralize her. Without the Queen's controlling intelligence, the theory went, the entire hive would fall into disarray. A direct assault against the prime intelligence of a hostile hive mind, Talon had said when the plan was first proposed. "It's suicide." "Only if you die," Kane had replied with that disconcerting smile. Now, as the assault teams prepared to deploy, Saren addressed them via communication link. "Coalition doctrine would call this mission impossible," he said frankly. "But you have shown us that doctrine must evolve or perish. You volunteer for this knowing the risks. The people of Lys Prime will remember your courage, whatever the outcome." "Save the memorials for after, Admiral," Kane replied, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. "We've got a job to do." Lieutenant Mira stood with the human team, her slender form now clad in modified combat armor. "I'm going with them," she had informed Saren earlier. "My xenobiological knowledge could be crucial if we encounter unknown hive adaptations." Saren had wanted to refuse, but recognized the determination in her stance. "Return safely, Lieutenant," was all he said. The assault craft launched, one from each Deathworlder contingent, each modified according to their unique technologies. The human vessel was heavily armored, bristling with kinetic weapons. The Varen craft pulsed with gravitational distortion fields designed to breach the Queen's outer hull through pressure differentials. The Thorn ship seemed almost alive, its surface sprouting metallic thorns that secreted corrosive compounds. As they approached the massive bioship, the Coalition fleet began its coordinated attack. Modified energy weapons targeted sensory clusters, while kinetic projectiles hammered at propulsion nodes. The Queen's vessel responded with devastating counterattacks, streams of corrosive fluid, swarms of interceptor drones, and energy pulses that overloaded shield systems. "Maintain attack pattern," Saren ordered, as his flagship shuddered under enemy fire. "Draw attention away from the assault teams." On the tactical display, he watched the 3 small craft approach the Queen's vessel from different vectors. The human team hit hard and fast, their kinetic weapons blasting an entry point through the outer hull. The Varen craft deployed what they called a pressure lock, creating a bubble of intensified gravitational force that tore open a breach. The Thorn vessel extended living filaments that burrowed through the biological material of the hull, dissolving it from within. "All teams have breached the outer hull," reported the communications officer. "Telemetry signals are weakening, interference from the bioship's mass." "Maintain fleet engagement," Saren ordered. "They'll contact us when they reach the objective." Inside the Queen's vessel, the assault teams faced a nightmare of organic horror. Corridors pulsed with living tissue. Defense mechanisms activated as they advanced. Acid-spewing glands, constricting membranes, swarms of defensive microorganisms. The environment itself became a weapon against them. But the Deathworlders had evolved on worlds where the environment was always a weapon. They adapted, overcame, pressed forward with relentless determination. When communication between teams was lost due to the dense biological material, they continued according to plan, fighting their way toward the center, where their instruments detected the most intense psychic emanations. Lieutenant Mira found herself drawing on survival instincts she never knew she possessed. She analyzed hive defenses, identifying vulnerabilities that even the Deathworlders missed. When a human soldier was injured by a neurotoxin, she synthesized an antidote using components from her field kit and thorn-derived compounds. "You're pretty good at this for a scientist," Kane told her as they fought through a chamber filled with egg sacs. "Evolution rewards adaptability," she replied, appropriating his earlier wisdom. The three teams converged near what their instruments identified as the central chamber. The resistance had grown more intense with each level they penetrated, elite warrior drones engaging them in vicious, close-quarters combat. Nearly a third of their original number had been lost or wounded severely enough to be left at makeshift defensive positions along their path. "The Queen will be protected by her royal guard," Vrain warned, as they prepared for the final push. "The most evolved, most intelligent drones, and her psychic abilities will be strongest here." "We stick to the plan," Kane insisted. "Multi-vector assault, simultaneous breach. The Viren pressure bombs will disorient her, long enough for the thorn toxins to neutralize her neural functions." "And if that fails," added Yilix, checking a particularly wicked-looking device strapped to his dense forearm, "we introduce her to kinetic persuasion." They breached the central chamber from 3 points simultaneously. What they found defied description: a colossal entity that barely resembled the drones they had fought. The Queen was a mountain of neural tissue and reproductive organs, surrounded by specialized appendages that interfaced with the ship's biological systems. Royal Guard drones, twice the size of standard warriors, formed a living shield around her. The battle that followed pushed even the Deathworlders to their limits. The Royal Guards fought with coordinated intelligence far beyond the drones they had faced before. Worse, the Queen herself unleashed psychic attacks that assaulted their minds directly, waves of terror, confusion, and despair that threatened to overwhelm their consciousness. Mira fell to her knees as the first psychic wave hit, her less evolved mind particularly vulnerable. Around her, she saw coalition soldiers from all three teams similarly affected. But the Deathworlders pressed on, their minds hardened by evolutionary pressures that had prepared them for every form of survival. Kane fought through the psychic assault, his expression locked in a grimace of determination as he eliminated Royal Guards with precise headshots. Willix deployed pressure bombs that created zones of crushing force, immobilizing guards and disrupting the Queen's concentration. Vrain and the surviving Thorn warriors released clouds of neurotoxic spores, specifically designed to target the Queen's neural pathways. The Queen's psychic scream intensified, becoming a shockwave of pure mental force. Mira felt blood trickling from her auditory membranes as the pressure in her skull became unbearable. Through dimming vision, she saw coalition soldiers collapsing, their minds unable to withstand the assault. Then, incredibly, a human form stood over her, Kane. His face streaked with blood from ruptured capillaries, but his stance unwavering. He fired his weapon again and again at the Queen's neural cluster, while physically shielding Mira with his body. "Stay with me, Lieutenant," he growled. "Focus on my voice. Your mind is stronger than hers." Inspired by his resilience, Mira forced herself to concentrate. She was a scientist, trained to observe and analyze. She focused on the Queen's neural structure, identifying patterns in the psychic attacks. "There," she gasped, pointing to a pulsating organ near what might be the Queen's equivalent of a brainstem. "That's the psychic amplifier. Target that specifically." Kane relayed the information to the other Deathworlder teams. Willix redirected his pressure attacks, while Vrain modified the dispersal pattern of the neurotoxins. The coordinated assault focused on the single vulnerability Mira had identified. The Queen's psychic defenses faltered, then collapsed entirely as the amplifier organ ruptured under the combined attack. The royal guards, suddenly deprived of their controlling intelligence, fell into disorganized chaos. "Now!" Kane roared. "Full assault on the primary neural cluster!" The Deathworlders converged on the Queen's central mass, deploying their weapons with savage precision. Kinetic rounds tore through neural tissue. Pressure bombs imploded critical organs. Neurotoxins disrupted synaptic functions. The Queen's massive form convulsed, bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically across her surface. With a final, silent, psychic wail that echoed in their minds like dying thunder, the Queen expired. The entire vessel shuddered around them as systems failed and defensive mechanisms deactivated. "We need to move," Kane ordered, helping Mira to her feet. "This entire structure is likely to destabilize without the Queen's controlling influence." They fought their way back through corridors now filled with disoriented drones, gathering survivors from their defensive positions as they retreated. When they reached their entry points, they found the breaches had begun to seal as the vessel's automated repair systems continued to function even without central direction. "The ship is dying, but still dangerous," Vrain observed as they forced their way through partially sealed tissue. "Like a severed limb that continues to twitch." They barely escaped as massive sections of the Queen's vessel began to rupture, spewing biological material into space. Coalition vessels moved in to extract the assault teams, tractor beams locking onto their small craft and pulling them to safety as the enormous bioship began to break apart. Admiral Saren watched from the command deck as the Queen's vessel disintegrated, its death throes illuminating space with bursts of bioluminescence and chemical reactions. Across the system, sensor reports confirmed what they had hoped. Without the Queen's controlling influence, Hive drones were falling into disarray. Some continued to fight with diminished effectiveness. Others simply went dormant. "Cease fire," he ordered. "All vessels hold position and prepare to receive the assault teams." When the Deathworlders and surviving Coalition soldiers returned to the flagship, they were met not with formal military reception, but with spontaneous celebration. Coalition personnel lined the corridors, casting aside protocol to cheer the returning heroes. Medical teams rushed to treat the wounded, while engineers and technicians crowded around to hear first-hand accounts of the battle. Lieutenant Mira found Admiral Saren waiting in the medical bay as she received treatment for her injuries. "Your actions were far beyond the call of duty, Lieutenant," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed deeper emotion than his words. "Your xenobiological insights proved crucial to the mission's success." "I simply applied scientific observation, Admiral," she replied modestly. "The Deathworlders did the impossible part." "Perhaps not impossible," Saren mused. "Simply beyond what we believed possible. There is a distinction." In the days that followed, recovery teams scoured the wreckage of the Queen's vessel, salvaging technology and biological samples that would advance Coalition science by decades. On the surface of Lys Prime, cleanup operations began in earnest, reclaiming territory from now disorganized Hive remnants. 2 weeks after the Queen's defeat, a formal communication arrived from Coalition High Command. Saren gathered the Deathworlder leaders in the command deck to receive it together. "Admiral Saren," began the holographic figure of the Coalition Supreme Commander. "Reports of your victory have reached High Command. The strategic significance of destroying a Hive Queen cannot be overstated. Analysis suggests this may set back Hive expansion by years, possibly decades." The Supreme Commander's expression shifted to one of formal diplomacy. "In recognition of the vital contribution made by the Deathworlder contingents, the Coalition High Council extends an invitation to the governments of Earth, Varen, and Thorn to send representatives to Coalition headquarters with a view toward full membership negotiations." Kane exchanged glances with Ilix and Vrain, their expressions suggesting this was more than they had expected. Furthermore, the Supreme Commander continued, "We are implementing immediate revisions to Coalition military doctrine based on the hybrid tactics developed during the Lies Prime campaign. Admiral Saren, you are hereby promoted to Strategic Command with a mandate to oversee these reforms." The message concluded with formal congratulations and logistical details for the aftermath operations. When the hologram faded, a moment of silence fell over the command deck. "Well," said Kane with his characteristic directness, "that's one way to say thank you for saving our advanced civilization with your primitive methods." Vrain's metallic filaments shimmered with what Saren had come to recognize as amusement. "They learn quickly for such comfortable beings." "Comfort breeds complacency," Ilex observed. "Crisis forces growth. Your coalition has experienced both now." Saren regarded these strange allies. No longer alien curiosities, but proven comrades. "What will your government say to the membership offer?" Kane shrugged. "Earth has been looking for allies who appreciate what we bring to the table beyond our rough edges. A seat at your coalition might be exactly what we need. The Varen Protectorate will consider the strategic advantages," Elix said pragmatically. "Though your environments will need significant modification for our comfort. The Thorn Collective seeks knowledge exchange above all," Vrain added. "Your biological sciences complement our evolutionary path." Later that evening, Saren stood once more at the observation deck, watching as shuttles ferried personnel and supplies between the fleet and the recovering surface of Liss Prime. Captain Talon joined him, datapad in hand, but momentarily forgotten as they both contemplated the view. "The reconstruction estimates are promising," Talon said after a comfortable silence. "With the Deathworlder engineering modifications, we can reclaim the primary cities within months, rather than years." "And the cultural modifications?" Saren asked. "Those may take longer." Talon considered this. "Change is always difficult. Some will resist the integration of Deathworlder methodologies. Others will embrace them too enthusiastically, without understanding the evolutionary context." He paused. "But most will adapt, as life always does." "As they taught us," Saren agreed. Lieutenant Mira approached. Her injuries healed, but her bearing permanently altered by her experiences. She carried herself now with something of the Deathworlder's alert readiness, her scientific precision tempered by newfound pragmatism. "The preliminary analysis of the Queen's neural tissue is complete," she reported. "The implications for our understanding of hive consciousness are revolutionary, and the applications for our own psychic defense systems." She trailed off, noticing their contemplative mood. "Is this a bad time?" "Not at all, Lieutenant," Saren assured her. "We were just reflecting on the changes ahead." "Speaking of change," Talon interjected, checking his datapad. "The Deathworlder contingents have requested permission to establish permanent liaison offices on Liss Prime during reconstruction. They're offering specialized training programs for Coalition forces." "Approve it immediately," Saren ordered. "And expand the scope. I want exchange programs, joint research initiatives, cultural orientation sessions." He turned back to the viewport, watching as a shuttle from the human vessel docked with Orbital Station 2. "We asked for reinforcements and received far more, a reminder of strength we had forgotten." "That the harshest conditions produce the most resilient life," Mira suggested. "That, and something more profound," Saren replied. "That true strength lies not in technological superiority or evolutionary advantage alone, but in the willingness to face the impossible and adapt." Below them, the scarred surface of Lice Prime gleamed in the light of its sun. Already, the destruction wrought by the Hive was being reclaimed by Coalition and Deathworlder teams working in concert. New structures rose alongside restored ones, neither purely Coalition nor Deathworlder in design, but a hybrid evolution, stronger, more adaptable, ready for whatever the universe might bring next. A new chapter had begun, an alliance forged by fire, tempered by the wisdom of worlds that had never allowed their children the luxury of complacency. And in that alliance lay not just the salvation of Lys Prime, but the future of a galactic civilization that had rediscovered what it meant to truly evolve.